As I said at the end of the last lesson, I've got all these great looking cutoffs. They're at 11 1/4 degrees, so it should be no surprise that they more or less form a ring. So that'll be my first step, is to clean these up and form a ring with them. My first step was to trim off the ends. Some of these pieces were pretty pointy. Then I set up a stop block in order to trim the ends of my laminations. This is a square cut. These got them all consistently dimensioned. Now I'm testing to see just how close those first cuts were. They're pretty close. Their angles are sharp enough where the clamps would slip off. I'm going to put these together in pairs, and so I'm putting these little pieces of wood on there to act as grippers for my clamps. I've got to have perfect surfaces, doing some disc sanding and some very, very thorough inspection. This is a large glue surface to get all the glue out of. It has to be a perfect surface. The glue job itself, nothing magical here. A lot of glue, spreading it evenly, a lot of clamping pressure, constantly checking to make sure all my perimeter edges are aligned properly. The skinny points on segments like this have a tendency to really distort with all the introduction of that glue. With hindsight, I wish I'd put those little wooden grippers closer to the tips. These glue jobs dried for at least a few hours. The next step is to get them cleaned back up. I'm using the disc sander to get all the surfaces back to smooth. And then I'm going to the bandsaw. I'm ripping these into thin segments that can be formed into individual rings. I mounted the smooth sanded surfaces to double-sided tape, ran them through the drum sander, got consistently dimensioned thicknesses, and now I've got all these segments ready to be formed into individual rings. Before going to the next glue step, I'm going to sand these on the disc sander. I've got a stop block set at 45 degrees. These are 22.5 degrees on each side. This gives me a much more accurate angle and a better surface. The key here is to get enough pressure across the tips. Wide segments like this, the real challenge on clamping is the tip area. That's why I'm using those glue calls. The next step's pretty easy, just a lot of rubber bands around here stretched each way. The design portion I'm going to go through here is right out of my volume 1. You may want to review that. I'm going to transfer the thickness onto paper, create a grid, and then draw a profile that I like. It's been transferred to the other side, so here's my vessel shape. I've numbered the layers. I've taken my half rings, taped them together, put a little scrap piece of wood there in the center, used my compass from the outside in 4 locations to determine the center point. Now I'm taking the inside diameter of these largest rings and transferring that dimension, that diameter, that cut line, right directly onto my disc. Here's the next one, and so forth. I'm marking the inside diameters on my plan there. I'm just transferring directly from my plan these various inside diameters on my 5 largest rings. Now once I've got the largest rings laid out, then I can go back and find places to put my smaller rings inside the larger rings. Here's the first 5 that are done. Number 4's got to find a home inside one of those. Number 7's probably got the largest inside diameter of the largest rings. So here I've laid out number 4 just inside number 7, and it fits barely. I'm also going to put the kerfloss line. By marking the kerfloss, I know exactly what's available for any other rings inside that previous ring. I continued the process, marked out all 9 rings, and now it's time to go to the bandsaw and cut these out. Using my blueprint as a guide, I can establish some little subtle angles. Number 9 and 8, about a 10-degree cut there to conform to my plan. 7 is pretty much a vertical angle. 6 is back to maybe a 10 to 15 degree angle. And then once I get below that, I'm adjusting the angle on my table to pretty close to a 45. That's a fairly steep slope as you get to the lower portion of the bowl. Now I can put these into a dry form. Here's my 9 pairs forming that bowl. Now it's a matter of making sure we got perfect seams on these halves, a little desanding, checking with the light, a little glue, a little rubbing, some rubber bands, getting these halves all together. Putting rubber bands around the rings with vertical edges, that's no problem. Now a ring like this with a very sloped edge, a band will not stay in place around the perimeter, but by going at it in this way, I can provide plenty of pressure. Now once I've got all the halves into full rings, I just touched them on the disc sander to get nice flat surfaces, and now I'm taking pairs and forming single rings out of 2. This is just a process of reducing the number of rings step after step until I can get a full complete bowl. Here I've joined 2 pairs into a stack of 4. Here I've mounted onto a piece of waste wood the first 3 rings. I use the MDF with a hole in the center as a centering device. Here I'm just truing things up, getting things round, preparing things for more rings. Here's another example of using the tailstock. Piece of MDF with a center hole. This stack of 4 has been centered and attached with just a couple of beads of hot melt, and then the tailstock provides the pressure for clamping. The turning is probably the easiest part of the whole project, just getting a nice smooth profile on the outside, matching the inside with a consistent wall thickness, about a strong 1/4 inch. I use sanding sealer, probably put 4 or 5 coats on there, scraping it off in between coats. I can put a coat on every few hours, so it's a fairly fast process to get the pores all filled up. After the last scraping, after the last application of sanding sealer, then power sanding up through the grits to 400 and get it nice and clean with a tack cloth. And then I used Def Spray, gloss in this case. In between coats of the Def Spray, I hit the surfaces with a sanding mop, a well-worn 400 grit sanding mop. And then the last coat I used some white diamond compound on a buffing wheel. Parting it off, cutting the last bit here with a saw, and then using some jumbo jaws to remount this in order to do just a little bit of gouge work and scraper work on the bottom. Now notice the little ridge out here on the edge. That's something I frequently do in order to create a bit of a shadow line as a bowl sits on a table. Just looks better. And then signing and finishing the bottom finishes the project. But wait, there's more. Remember, I only needed 9 rings for this bowl. There was a lot more material left over from these large discs. So I took those leftovers and produced these 2 bowls. You'll see these bowls in just a few seconds. And in addition, remember these cutoffs from trimming up the large segments? Seemed like a shame to throw those in the trash. So a little compass work, a little work at the bandsaw to produce these circles, a little double-sided tape on the lathe, turning, getting a little recessed area turned. I'm making a set of 4 coasters here. Took no time at all. Making sure it's nice and flat across there, a little sanding, and then sanding sealer and the same Def Spray finishes these off, except for the very bottoms. There I'm protecting the surfaces on the edge with blue tape, spraying some 3M adhesive on both the bottoms and on this leather suede-like material, clamping it for a half an hour or so. Then I can come back with a nice pair of sharp scissors and trim around this edge, and in no time at all produce a set of 4 coasters. So from the scraps left over from the clock project, here's what I produced. Always be on the lookout for these kind of opportunities. When it was all done, I still had more leftovers, enough for another bowl.